and I gained 5,000 followers in a couple hours. I have wrestled with those followers since I made that video. I had to decide if God has given me any sort of platform, whether it's even just my friends and family. My responsibility is to be a good steward of that.
Hey, welcome friends. Welcome to Grow Together, the 11th episode for season 3. This is Saehee and I'm with my co-host Lainie. Lainie, good to see you.
Hi guys. Hi Saehee. Hi everyone.
Wow, we are already in November, so this is a critical month because things are changing. Weather's already changed, right?
Yes.
And then the ministry priorities changed, but I think what doesn't change is our constant engagement with people. Well, in these days, like people engage people in different various ways, including the social media platform.
Yeah.
So we got to stay connected.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Well, we're more connected, right? We're the most connected probably that our world has ever been. So you're right. It's a whole new perspective, a whole new context and landscape that we're engaging with as ministers and as ministerial leaders each and every day. It's a lot. It's so much engagement, right?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a lot of engagement each and every day.
Yeah. And one of my great mentors have told me to watch what I say on social media because people are watching. I didn't know that people are watching at times, but I've got a few messages before. I'm just being honest, right?
Yeah.
Like, you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have posted. Well, I didn't know that what I said had much value or weight. But I'm learning that as ministers and visible leaders, that we got to watch what we say because that's how we also lead on the social media platform. So I think the way we present ourselves, it's a critical conversation that we can have today. And it's something that people are just talking about. It's just natural part of life nowadays, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, so much has happened. I think even recently, right? We've seen I think even a greater focus on the age of celebritism, if you will, within leaders, which has come with some really hard situations and hard conversations. But it also has provided, I think, an opportunity and awareness. I think in places where there are pockets of awareness, now I think there's probably more of a landscape of awareness where we're all asking some questions, we're digging into it more, we're trying to figure out, okay, we're taking ownership of maybe we didn't do this best, or maybe we have some places to grow or to look into this again. And it gives us a chance to have some of these conversations where we might even have some diverging thoughts, right? But we can all come with hearts of integrity and humility and to say, hey, let's try and think through this together so we can be the best reflection of the Lord's heart as possible.
Absolutely. And that's part of the reasons why we love on this platform of communications, because we get to tackle some tough conversations and tough topics. And today, why don't we just talk about that? Maybe talking about the curating on social media as ministers. Is that even a thing, or is that even biblical? Why not just talk about it? We may just walk away with no answers, but maybe some deeper thinking and just way to engage this topic better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's dig into it. I mean, I think the question of branding is huge right now, especially, right? Like, do we want a brand as a church, but even just personally, I'd love it if we could chat a little bit about, okay, what does it look like? Is there to curate a brand in today's society, right? Like brands and platforms, and what does that look like as leaders and specifically ministry leaders? And should we curate an image in a digital world or a digital platform? There's a lot of nuances to the conversation. So yeah, I think it's great if we can dig into that and try and bring whatever we can to the conversation.
Sure. I think this will take more than just you and I. So let's go ahead and invite some amazing guests who are doing a great job in their ministry in different contexts, but their opinions will bring so much value. So who do we want to invite to the conversation today?
Oh man, I can't wait. Okay, so I get to introduce some of my dear friends to you all today. We have Lauren VanderLinden and we have TJ Ono. These are amazing people who I've gotten to journey through life with at various seasons. So Lauren and I actually became friends when I was in the 3rd grade. So I had recently moved to Iowa, and I was a Northeast girl, moving into, the cornfields of Iowa back in that time frame. And it was quite the culture shock for me. And Lauren and her family, man, they just welcomed me in, and I love them very deeply. And it was a wonderful season. And as we grew up, Lauren actually now serves with a church there that's in the area that that she grew up in and that I lived in for that season. It's called Summit Creek Church in Johnston, Iowa, and she serves on their teaching team and has led in a variety of capacities as a worship director, as working with staff teams. So she's done a lot in that frame of reference, and she does several other things. You might have even seen her on social media. She has hilarious posts and stories. She's known for some of her comedy that she's brought to the stage there. And she's also in the process of publishing a book. So she might share a little bit more with us about that at some point, but be on the lookout for that.
So very accomplished, a friend. Well, okay. Do we have another guest? I know that you were just talking about the TJ, so I'm curious. Who is he?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay. So then I also get to welcome to you today my friend TJ Ono. TJ and I are friends in ministry. We were friends from seminary. So when I initially moved out to New England to start my seminary education, TJ then joined me there about a year later. TJ is amazing. He is an incredible studier of the Word of God. He brings this fresh, contemplative spirituality to the conversation. I think that challenges our sense of modern hurry. It challenges our definitions of success. TJ has been someone I've gotten to grow with along the way, who's taught me a lot and who we've gotten to grow together through our seminary experience. So he is stellar, and I know he's going to have an amazing perspective to bring to us today.
All right, let's not wait for them anymore. Let's bring them on. Okay. All right, Lauren and TJ, welcome to Grow Together.
Hey, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, welcome.
Okay, I am kind of curious about Lauren's comedy, but we'll save that for later.
Lainie was way too kind.
Wow. Well, super excited to have the conversation with you on this very important topic. About curating an image on social media, because we live in a digital world, right? And that's every day. It's just become such a big part of who we are, church or non-church people, whatever. But this topic particularly, does it even matter? I just want to maybe start with that. Is that even worth a podcast to talk about it, really? I'm pretty sure there's some reasons behind it. So let's go with TJ and then Lauren and pick that up from there.
Yeah, well, thanks for having the two of us here today. I'm super grateful. Does this conversation matter? Yes. And the reason why is because we're using the word image. So why should we think about curating images? And every time we think about the word image, there's something always at stake. And what's at stake when we think about people and images? What's at stake is glory, right? We are made in the image of God. And what that cashes out to mean, and what that means for us as people, is that there's glory instilled in each of our creatureliness, in all of our particularities, in all of our identities. There's something woven into the very fabric of our being. And what's woven into our very nature is glory. And so the reason why, this conversation matters is because we're talking about glory. What's at stake is the glory of God radiating and exuding out of our very creatureliness. And so, does this conversation matter? Because we're talking about glory. Talking about image.
That's really good. As people made in God's image, curating that as conduit. That's very good. All right, Lauren.
Yeah, I'm glad you went first, TJ. Your response had me almost in tears. I was going to take a much more practical approach to this question. TJ, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, yes, we're curating images. Is it for our glory? Is it for God's glory? Can there be glory in us representing ourselves in a godly way? Can there be glory that points to God? I would say absolutely. From a practical standpoint, I think a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with social media. Whether you are successful on it or unsuccessful on it, you have that love-hate relationship with social media, to the point where a lot of us have asked the question, will this expire? Does it have an end date? We know that studies have shown it can increase depression, it can increase anxiety, increase your desire to compare yourself to one another. But at the end of the day, what research is finding is that attention is now currency. So where brands in the past maybe wanted sales and revenue, they are also seeking your attention just as much, because they know it will lead to that. And I just had to make a decision that if this space is going to be where people's attention is, what can I do to bring their attention and their focus on God and joy and encouragement in a space where their attention can be on a lot of other things? That's why I think it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Lauren. I mean, it's this tension that we live in, right? Like teacher's saying, like the spiritual realities of who we are and who God is, and they're really the privilege, but also just the innate responsibility we have as followers and disciples of Christ to represent that character, to represent the glory of the image of God, that thankfully the Spirit of the Lord helps us with. Otherwise, I don't know how in the world we could ever do that. But you're right, Lauren, we live in this practicality of, okay, I read something recently that said that our Gen Zs, it was an article from Barna. They've done, they do tons of research, but recently they were mentioning that teenagers, and specifically our Generation Z, is getting approximately 10 times more attention, 10 times more consumption of cultural communication than they are spiritual communication.
Oh, wow.
And the implications of what that means on our discipling and on the future of our ministries and how we relate to people, I think that has a big impact. Like you're saying, it matters. Like these things are going to translate to our spiritual realities and the realities as ministers. So as we look at that, Lauren, I would come to ask you, so then how have you done that? Like, how have you taken this practical aspect of, okay, how do we, when we're thinking about something that matters so much, how do you actually and practically engage with a social media branding or a social media presence that can actually point to the glory of God, to use TJ's terminology?
Really good.
Lainie, I have wrestled with this. So, Saehee, I know that you mentioned wanting to know a little bit more about my funny videos. I made a video about Chick-fil-A nuggets in response to the comedian John Crist video about Chick-fil-A strips. We all know nuggets are better, shameless plug. But when I did that, that was 4 years ago. When I did that, he kind of called me out and I gained 5,000 followers in a couple hours. I have wrestled with those followers since I made that video. I've wrestled with, does God want me to have a platform? Do I give up this platform? I don't even know why they follow me. I'm going to quit Instagram. Maybe I should capitalize on this. I have wrestled with that tension since then. And we are talking about a very small number of followers in the grand scheme of things and compared to a lot of people. But I had to decide, if God has given me any sort of platform, whether it's even just my friends and family, my responsibility is to be a good steward of that. And so I have approached it with the strategy of really three things: bringing joy to other people, bringing encouragement to other people, and speaking boldly on topics that I feel are biblical truths. And as long as I'm doing those things, I think that I am stewarding the platform in a way that honors God. And I have to decide in my own heart that if God ever called me to step away from that, because it is coming to be about my glory versus his, I have to be okay with releasing that.
It's really good.
Wow. Yeah, Lauren, I think that last point you made, especially there, stuck out to me, that you have to be all right to release it too, right? Like we're talking about, like you're saying, like platform, whose glory is it? As we look at that, I think this is the hard part that we run into, right? Because we have these opportunities that you're mentioning, bringing biblical truth, bringing joy into a space that has a lot of anxiety and depression and painful messaging that's already there. We have an incredible message of hope, right, that we want to bring. And we have this tool and resource that could potentially reach so many people. And so as we look at that, I think then we see on the other side this rise of celebritism, right? That we think, oh man, well, I would hope that maybe most of us or all of us would think, I don't want to do that, because I think we've seen a lot of what that can end up in, and the pitfalls and some of the dangers there. And I know that as leaders and ministers, we want to contribute to a healthy church that, like I said, reflects God's heart accurately and beautifully. We don't want to contribute to a leadership crisis, right? That's never our heart or our desire. But then there's the realities of our human nature too, right? So we've got like bearing the image of God, and the fact that there's something embedded in platform that, in the words of Sharon Miller, I want to give credit to where credit is due. She refers to this as a gravitational pull and talks about platform. It has this gravitational pull of self-word. And so it's almost like that we're fighting against this, right? As we engage in this process. And you mentioned some of the beautiful ways that you intentionally try and fight against that and place in some boundaries. TJ, as you're hearing this conversation and we think about that gravitational pull, how would you respond to that? What would you think about those dynamics?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, Lainie. I think we could approach this in a billion different ways. I do want to root this conversation, though, in our humanity, in our anthropology, and what it means for us to be creatures, pinnacle creatures for sure, but creatures. Lauren, you are exactly right to bring up the attention economy. Our economy is drastically changing, and that is shaping and forming us. Globalization, the digitization of everything has changed and shaped our world in a way that there is no going back. But we are Christians. We are people who follow Jesus, and that means that we operate in the world in a subversive kind of way. And so I think what's at stake here, and the conversations that we should be having, are ones about what does it mean for us to be human? And as we engage with the digital world and artificial intelligence and all of these big questions, I think ultimately the questions that we're wrestling with are questions of our humanity. And I think another thing that we need to be asking is, what does it mean for us to be ministers in this digital world? I think a lot of times we've made a lot of trades in pastoral ministry lately. We've traded things like relationship and intimacy with influence. And I think that's actually really devastating. What I want to propose is, what would it look like to root our pastoral ministry, our creaturely ministry, in creation itself, in place and people? What would it look like to for us to reclaim this sense of we are finite creatures ministering in creation? And I think that the challenge social media gives us is this idea that we can be ever expanding. It's kind of like we're building this huge empire trying to take over the world. And so I think what can be lost in that is neighborly love. What does it look like for me to be a neighbor, not just an influencer? What does it look like for me to be sacrificial and to lose my life for the sake of caring for the widow and the orphan, for those who are marginalized and vulnerable? And I think people can do that with social media. I just think it would take a lot of biblical and theological reflection for us to do that well.
Teacher, I'm getting goosebumps because the way you're talking about is just being human first before we even think about curating an image as a minister and influencer, because we're at the core, we're all broken humanities. And as I've been studying our generation and ministering, I've realized that people relate to God even more through our brokenness rather than through our success and the level of influence. So we're talking about how do we curate our image for God's glory on social media. I think part of it is just to be broken and be vulnerable. I think that's a strength that we have using social media as ministers. We don't have to look perfect. I think there was a generation before us that it was not appropriate for them to be vulnerable or show any weakness as a minister. But that's such a lie, and we're all human beings and we struggle. And I think it's totally fine that we use that kind of platform to encourage people. Hey, we're in brokenness as human beings, as good neighbors, right, TJ? Let's help one another. I may be a minister today, but I need your help as my neighbor and friend. I need your prayer today, this week, and just kind of like using that. I think that authenticity is super important. And there's another research, according to Forbes, the number one strength of influencers or leaders is sympathy. Empathy today. Yeah, it's empathy, not sympathy. Empathizing with people, their brokenness, their heartache, their struggles. So I think there is a really great opportunity for us not to just curate this perfect image, although we pursue the holiness of God and we're supposed to exemplify the righteousness of God. In the end, we're broken human beings, like TG said. We are humans first, and so like being okay with that, being authentic with that, and showing up real, both in person, in reality, and also in social media. I think that will bridge a lot of bridges, build a lot of bridges.
Yeah. Something that you said during that triggered a thought. Our humanity is what makes us imperfect, but our humanity is not what makes us have the ability to feel pain. God has the ability to feel pain as well. He has the ability to hurt, to cry, to lament. And so we even get that from him. And so, yes, we're called to a righteous lifestyle. I think you hit the nail on the head. And yet there is that balance of showing not just our humanity in that we might have flaws, but our humanity in that we feel real emotions and things aren't always happy all the time.
Yeah. That's good. So I have a follow-up question then. So we're talking about curating an image, and we want to do in a right way to bring honor and glory to God. But we're talking about young ministers that are, learning to be examples to others, or maybe even a latter generation who are now starting to learn, how do I use this platform to be an example? So, I don't know about you, but when I was growing in my leadership journey and the pastoral ministry, I looked at other examples like, oh, I like the way she talked. Oh, I like the way he preached. So I started to act like them and talk like them, even pray like them. Like, oh, I felt blessed when it sounded like that. So I started to do it, and I'm like, that is not me, right? So when we're talking about curing an image, yes, we want to look and sound like Jesus, and we want to sound wise and godly, all that. First, we have to be wise to sound wise. I get that. But how do we even determine that? Finding your own voice, curating an image that is truly 100% you, that reflects the image of God. How did you find that?
Man, I'm going to lean on something TJ said earlier, just about our identity really can come from God. And I think you have to be assured in that. You have to know where your boundaries are. You have to know how you feel on certain issues. And that doesn't mean that can't change. And that doesn't mean that you have to have the right answer for everything. But I think the conversation should be off of social media. It should be between you and God and your mentors and possibly your family, or maybe your pastor, whether you pastor a congregation or not. I think it's a great practice to have a pastor outside of your church as well. And so I think that if you know your identity, you can better filter out what is your voice and what is the voice of others, even if it's a good voice, right? I'd love to be Christine Kane. I'll just throw that out.
Yeah. Yes.
I love that.
Right.
Yeah. That's yeah. If I had an eighth of Christine Kane's energy, I think I would get, my life I would do so much more with my life. Yeah, I resonate with that deeply of putting on other people's ways and mannerisms to try to figure out who I am. And I don't know if you guys are like Enneagram fans. The 4 super resonates with me. And so identity is like core to, the existential crises of the 4. But no, yeah. I think a lot of, these questions of like, what does it mean for us to be authentic? Like that is such a big question. And what does it mean to be ourselves? These are huge questions.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is like coming to terms with like, as I like try on these different mannerisms, these ways, if something doesn't feel like me, that is totally fine. It's like coming to terms with, our limitations. I think so much of that question is just around like, okay, like I can't be Christine Kane. I can't be this or that. And when I bump into my finitude, I'm going to say, okay. I think a lot of, at least for me, as I've tried to figure this out, I was in the mega church world for, a good little bit, and I got super burnt by that. And I tried that hat on. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that.
Right.
And so there is, I think a lot of it is just coming to terms with when I bump into my, it's my boundaries, to the places where I feel like I'm disintegrating instead of becoming whole. I need to say, okay, I don't have to do that. I'm going to sit with the Lord and try to figure out another way to go.
That's so good.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so good, because when God called you, God didn't call Lauren, TJ, Lainie, and me to be Christy King. I mean, God called you to be you, me to be me. And that's just going to do church much better and bring much benefit as a whole, rather than me trying to be something else. God didn't create us to be somebody else but us.
Right. And people can tell. That's what I would say. People can tell when you're not being your authentic self. So it's great to have role models and say, I want the boldness of Christine Kane. And I'm going to go sit with God and read about how God has not given us a spirit of timidity, right? God has given us a spirit of boldness, but I've still got to lean on God for that boldness. I cannot lean on myself. And at the end of the day, that authenticity will always shine through. People can sense it. I led worship. I still lead worship, but I led our worship team for 7 years. And man, I know the vocal styles of Carrie Job, Jen Johnson, Henry and Alex Seeley. I don't think Alex Seeley sings, but Lauren Daigle, them all, right? You know the styles, what they do in the instrumentals. People can tell when it's not authentic and when it's not spirit-led. They can tell a counterfeit from what's real.
Yeah, even on social media. Absolutely. That is so true.
Yeah, it's so true. And I love what you guys are saying. I think you both mentioned this at different points. I just want to stop and capture it because I think it's critical to the conversation. But you've said it in different ways, but the bottom line is character is not formed on social media. The formation of our character happens offline. Right? Like, and that's the primary vehicle, as TJ's talking about, like what he calls creatureliness and this being these representatives of Christ, this dependent being on God, right? We're not independent beings, we're dependent beings. And there's actually beautiful freedom in that. And it's a wonderful thing. But as we look at that, the critical conversation to this is really, if our character is not formed, and this is me also personally speaking, so if you guys disagree, you're welcome to say it, but I don't feel, and not that we ever reach like perfection, right? I'm not saying like our character has reached like full telos, like we've been completed, so now we can have a platform. No, like that's not all what I'm talking about. But there are formative character building levels of spiritual maturity that I would say need to take place before you would start speaking into a public platform. And I think our character will always take us much farther in life and much deeper with God and much closer to people than our like social media followership ever could, right? Like the primary followership is our Christ followership, and it's that discipleship. And out of that, as the Lord brings influence into our lives, then we share with the influence that he brings us, whether that's 3 people in your ministry or whether, like Lauren said, that's overnight 5,000 that you weren't expecting. And now you have this that also has been provided in your life. We have different seasons, right? And different contexts that we are given. And I think one of the most powerful ways that we can use platform is back to that currency question, right? How are you going to use currency? And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to use it to not to oppose the self-word gravitational pull by being by looking at others' word, right? And so when you have these seats of influence, regardless of whatever they are, what is your curating, right? Again, are you curating self, or are you providing an opportunity to lift others to that platform, right? Are you lifting others who maybe don't have a voice, or who the Lord is using and you trust in their spiritual maturity, or you're working with to grow, right? And you want to provide these pathways for them. I think that can be one of the most powerful ways that we can use any influence that's placed in our hands. And I think it helps us look outside of ourselves, and not that it can solve the innate, gravitational pull. I think that's present. We need to be aware of it, but I do think it can help to shift that conversation. So
I think, Lainie, you answered my final questions that I was going to ask about what is a fine line about us curating an image for God and just doing it in holiness and righteousness and narcissistic attitude. What Lauren just talked about, going back to your character building, holiness with God in private space, before you even curate any image or any post on social media. So I think that's a very good point that you guys both mentioned, and Lainie, you kind of wrapped it around and summarized it really well. It's a fine balance. I think it's really the matter of our heart, and our heart is so fickle, right?
Yeah.
And at one moment we can be like, oh, God, I honor you. I want to do this, use all this influence for you. And then our humanness sits in, and then, oh, maybe not, So that's a really fine balance. But to keep it where it's supposed to be, again, going back to our humanism, brokenness, going back to our private time with the Lord, keep humbling ourselves as we lead ourselves first, before God and following Christ. And then hopefully we'll be good enough for people to look up to and say, hey, you know what? I want to be just like that person. Hopefully, right? Well, guys, thank you so much for your conversation. TJ and Lauren, if you have any final thoughts for our audience that are really struggling with this topic, one way or the other, would you like to give them some final wisdom before we wrap our conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, be authentically you and use social media, regardless of the size of your platform, as a way to serve others, as a way to fulfill out the calling that's on us, which is to go and reach the world. And that might not look like always sharing the salvation message, but it could look like sharing hope, sharing joy, sharing love with one another. It's a great tool that you can use to do all of those things. But I would also say, if you need to take a break from it, don't be ashamed to take a break and recenter, get back in the Word, get back in real life, lead your life group, ask a girl to brunch who needs encouragement. That is the stuff that really matters when we talk about storing our treasure in heaven.
Yeah, that's right. Very good.
Yeah. This has been so fun. Last few things. Our understanding of ourselves has drastically changed in the last couple hundred years, and to push back against our current modern self-understanding, I just want all of us to take in and breathe in the reality that we are what we receive. We are ourselves because we have received ourselves from God. We are the beloved because we have received love from God. We are what we receive, not what we try to curate or strive for. We are what we receive, and I think that frees us up to be ourselves. That frees us up to not try to have to, be X or Y. We can just, as we engage social media, if we have received ourselves, it gives us the freedom to be ourselves, even if that means people don't like us. That's like totally okay. We are what we receive. And the last thing I'd love to share is back to that question of image and glory. We are glorious creatures. We're not just broken, we're being redeemed.
Yes.
And we're being redeemed into glorious creatures who will inhabit the earth with Christ when Christ returns. And I think, we can, in this world of digital curation and all of that, I think it's like very possible for us to think a little bit, we can think a lot about our own glory, but it's impossible for us to think too much about our neighbor's glory. And so in this, conversation about social media and image and the attention economy, I just wonder what it would look like for us to frame our imaginations, to consistently come out of ourselves and say, I want to see Lainie's glory. I want to see, I just want to imagine who is the creature that God is forming and shaping and weaving and redeeming her to be. What is the glory that I get to encounter when I am with Lainie? And how do I, use my digital and non-digital platforms to just be curious about these embodiments of glory that we get to encounter? And so love your neighbor.
Yeah,
Amen.
absolutely. And I think that I love that reshaping the imagination, TJ, because I think that's relevant in so much even to this conversation and beyond this conversation for sure. And we can't capture everything in one conversation. I wish we could. So this is absolutely something, we should all, I would encourage everyone who's viewing this to have this be you've probably already thought about this. If you haven't, let this be an impetus for more study into this conversation. Let this be an impetus to go back into the word. Let it be an impetus to go back and talk to mentors and leaders you trust and really evaluate your heart with the Lord on this process. But as we look at it, I love what you said about curiosity. And what if we could even change the conversation from curation to curiosity? Right? A curiosity about God, a curiosity about one another, a curiosity about scripture. And then instead of shaping and curating something, we are curious, right? We're curious in our social interactions, whether it be on a media platform or on the street as we're walking down the road or, behind a pulpit that we stand on if we do on Sundays or Wednesday nights or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever it looks like for you in your context. I think that's powerful. And that would be part of my encouragement to myself, absolutely, and us in this conversation, but also to everyone who's joining us today. One is, who can you be curious about in your world that's there presently right now? Who needs your curiosity that you could begin that engagement with, whether it's social media or even just personally in your world. What if we could walk away from this conversation and begin the reshaping of our imaginations in our pastoral or ministerial context today? And I would say, let's do that. Let's leave the conversation there.
That's good. I love it. My final thoughts and reflection is that you can only reflect and curate an image that's you. So make sure that you are right with God. But also my image on social media can pique curiosity of other people about Jesus. And I think that's the ultimate goal, right? Yes, stay curious about our neighbors, absolutely. But ultimately, if what we post, what we say on social media causes curiosity from the people that are far from God, to say, you know what is this about Jesus that is making this person so attractive, that we're magnetic kind of people toward Jesus through what we post, what we say. So maybe that's some thought that we can continue to carry on. Today, we just had a great conversation.
Yeah,
No
thank you
right,
so much.
wrong answer. So I think it's an important thing that we do have opportunities like this. Just continue to process it. Really, we're growing together. We haven't arrived yet. We're growing together. So thank you, friends, for joining us. Continue to follow us on our social media, speaking of AG Woman Ministers, and we're going to try our best to make you curious about Jesus. Well, we'll see you next month. Thank you, friends. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.